Rich Rising. Reverend Mary Hawk.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Witch Rising. I'm your host, Reverend Mary Hawk, and with me is Sir Pam Kelly, and she is here to talk to us about practical ways to be a pagan activist. So, Pam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. That was passionate things I'm very passionate about. So I'm
All
glad to
right.
be here.
And Mark, thanks for joining us. Merry meet to you as well. And we will be happy to take your questions as we are going through this. And Pam, you sent me a whole bunch of links. So, where do we want to get started?
I think the first thing we should do is probably the opinion piece that the Wild Hunt did.
Okay.
And it's the editorial spiritual warfare rhetoric and anti-pagan sentiment is reaching contagion. And again, this is an editorial from Manny Moreno. It came out only on the 19th. Um, and what I would like to bring to everyone's attention is a lot of people talk about politics like it's removed from us, or like our politicians are overlords, or there's a lot of people who kind of have this feeling like we have to respect them, and we should respect people like we would normally respect people. But the one thing that a lot of people don't understand, I feel, is that they're our employees, and they're there to represent us, and it's very scary. Like what you're showing right here, it's very scary how this there's a part of politics right now that is elevating one belief system over all the others, and it focuses on demonizing us. Now, I'm going to be open here, and when I start talking, I would like you to understand that I'm going to use general terms on how you can get involved yourself as an activist, not necessarily as a partisan. But I am a person who is an officer of the Democratic Party in my county, in my at a state level. Sorry, my dog wants to say that she has she approves this message, but I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm not going to proselytize any specific party. I will highlight fringes of what you're hearing from people, because this is dangerous. And one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of people is that one party has been taken over a lot with some very fundamentalist Christian beliefs. And they go so far as, I'm a Democrat. They go as far as to literally demonize us by calling us demoncrats. They feel that we're evil. They don't picture the give and the take of our country's politics should be a little bit confrontational. It should be a little bit, we don't want everybody thinking the same way. We want to have the conversations. We want to have the give and take. But when you're having one party that's literally demonizing and making this a good versus evil, that is dangerous for the country, but it's also dangerous for pagans. Um, so I see that you're highlighting right now part of this editorial. We know about the transphobia that is very prevalent in one party. Um, I don't know if you know how far the U.S. military has gone to make the military an open place for trans people, for LGBTQ. When I grew up as a military brat, um, you couldn't, if they found out that you were gay, you would get, not only would you get kicked out of the military, you could go to prison for it. Prison. You could go to prison for it, and you would lose all the benefits that you worked towards getting by being a member of the military. So I knew a person who was I'm gonna bring up what you just brought up in chat. But I knew a person who was a colonel, very high ranking officer in the military, and they found out that he was gay, and he lost all of his retirement. And he ended up, the reason I knew him is he ended up in a job with me that was a pretty entry level job, trying to make all his life's work gone because of how they focused. Well, the military has turned around a lot and have tried their best to make the military an inclusive place for people to be. I want to reach out with what Nina said real quick. She says there's churches in Grayson County, Texas, and Bryan County, Oklahoma. It's not far from my old stomping grounds in Wichita County, Texas, that teach children that Democrats are Democrats. And that is true. That is happening right now. Again, I am not trying to tell you to be on one side or the other, but I am illustrating that there are people on one side that are taking it there.
And I'm going to point out that our Constitution states there is no religious test for office. So you can belong to one political party or another, but what religion you practice is not supposed to have a bearing on you when you run for office. So I am going to throw that out there. It's in the United States Constitution, and I am from Tennessee, and I know it's in the Tennessee State Constitution. I'm sure it's in other state constitutions. Your politics and your religion are not supposed to interfere. And good evening, Cherry. Thank you for joining us.
In Texas, though, unless they've changed it recently, they don't say which religion you have to believe in, but I think you have to believe in God if you want to run for office. So I believe that that's still in the Texas Constitution. I can, if anyone wants to prove me wrong, then that's fine. I can be wrong. I hope my dog's not too noisy. Let me know if she is. I can try to get her something else to chew on. Well, back to the military. The military has worked really hard at trying to make a pretty inclusive environment. And one of the things with the military, I was raised in the military. I became a military wife, and I became a civilian that worked with the military. I tried to join the military, but I've got medical issues. And I'll go into the disability stuff later. I am a person with a disability, with disabilities. But when I worked as a civilian with the military, one of the things I did as a volunteer was, at this point in time, there are no pagan chaplains in active duty. I think that there might be some in the Guard, might be one in the Guard. But active duty pagans, we got really close, but we didn't get that. But the military, if you go to the chaplain's there for your spiritual well-being. And if you remember, anyone who watched the old TV show MASH, Father Mulcahy was definitely Catholic, but he reached out for all the spiritual needs for everyone, no matter what their faith is. They have that in the military. I was what was known as, at the time, a distinctive faith group leader. I was a distinctive faith group leader. They call him a non-chaplain worship leader now. So the military recognized me as part of the people, a person that worked with the military members, as a pagan, Wiccan, heathen. So the military's worked really hard to to be inclusive with not only LGBTQ, but with all faiths, including pagan faiths. And the reason I want to bring this up right now is today is an extremely important day in that journey. When we're talking about the military, we're talking about the Department of Defense, which is, Air Force, Army, etc. There's another department, which is Veterans Affairs. Though the Department of Defense allowed pagans to have like Wiccan on their dog tags and to wear pentacles as their religious symbol. The VA was not allowing pagans to put pentacles as their grave markers when they passed. And it was in 2007, April 23rd, that the Department of Veterans Affairs, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, finally success in the Pentacle Quest. We lost a staff sergeant in the Army, Patrick Stewart. He was lost in action, and he wanted a pentacle on his grave marker. And they fought long and hard for it, and it was approved on this. There were other people who were fighting as well, and it was approved on this day in 2007. And that was a lot of pagans that worked hard to make that happen. Right here, you're seeing Circle Sanctuary, and I do a lot of work. When I did my work with the pagans in the military, I was sponsored by Circle Sanctuary. So they do a lot of work, not only with pagans in the military, but with Lady Liberty League, with anyone, pagans needing help, like a help at work, legal help for pagan issues. So one of the things that came from this pagan quest is a lot of people who were Druid or heathen were like, well, why is the Mjolnir not on there? Why isn't it not on there? But what happened when they won this victory is they changed the process that people go through to ask for their symbol to be placed on their grave marker. So if you would like an Olin, then you would put it on your paperwork. Make sure the people around you, the people you love, the people you trust, know that this is what your wishes are. And when you pass, they can fight for you. So every time we get that victory of a new symbol, it wasn't too long ago that we had the Mjolnir and we had the Owen that was accepted as an approved symbol. And I always have a moment of, it's a heavy moment for me because it means somebody passed. Somebody literally died so we could have those symbols. Somebody who served our country literally died so we could have our symbols represented on their grave marker to show that we're everywhere. We're everywhere. So please remember the 23rd of April. I'm looking forward to when we get to one of the like maybe 2027. That'll be the 20th anniversary of it. So that was extremely important work that the military did.
Yes, it is.
But it takes people stepping out of their comfort zone, because I'll admit I grew up in the military, and as far back as I remember, I was checking books out of the library, learning how to do spells, read tarot, but I was always afraid to mention anything about it. I remember my father and his friends teasing one of the first Wiccan airmen that came out and wanted to have the solstice off. And it was almost like a joke. So we've come really far, but it takes us finding that bravery. And we have the protection right now of the Constitution, of laws. Yes. But those laws, they rely on us standing up for them.
Exactly.
So, do you mind, since we're talking Texas, do you mind posting the story I gave you about Texas?
Not at all. Let me get that one pulled up here.
I love Texas, by the way. I was raised a good part of my life in Texas. So, and I have a lot of family members in Texas. So I'm not bashing Texans. I'm bashing the people in power. And the reason people get where they are in power is because of voter suppression, because of complacency. And Cherry said, you live in the Bible Belt in the red state. If you're not a Baptist, they won't vote for you. If you don't have an R behind your name, they won't vote for you. Where I lived in Texas was very close to Cherry in Wichita County. At the point when I was living there, I've moved to North Carolina now in an equally red, almost as red area. But when I was living in Texas, I was in the reddest congressional district in the United States, according to the Cook Partisan Voting Index. It's changed now. I think it's in Alabama or Mississippi, but it was extremely red. So Texas, there's hope in Texas, but it comes from people being able to stand up to the people who are making these ridiculous laws. We know what's going on with women's reproductive health rights, abortion,
That's
attacks.
another show.
Yeah, but it's all connected. We know what's going
It
on
is.
with that. Thankfully, whatever happened in the Supreme Court on Friday for them to realize that maybe it's not a good idea to yank FDA-approved medicine off. They haven't made. They're just like, okay, we're going to do a timeout now. We're going to leave everything as it is, but it hasn't been settled yet. So everyone needs to know. Nina, you are correct. She said, wrong. Democrats in Texas vote. It's so gerrymandered it doesn't count. There is truth to what you're saying, but there's also suppression, and there's also a lot of voter apathy. So it all works together. They're all ingredients that work together.
And
So-
I will share this with you, Pam. After I did my last show on the Tennessee Three, regarding especially the two black senators who were expelled from the legislature for interrupting the session, speaking out of term, which requires censure, not expulsion. I got a message through Witch Rising telling me that since the burning times, pagans have stayed out of politics, and here comes woke Mary Hawk ruining that.
That's not true. That is not true. I mean,
It
that's
is
true
not
about
true.
the statement, but it is not true. If we look at the history of where neo-paganism, U.S. paganism that has grown out of ecofeminism, out of feminism, out of ecological, there's a lot of history in pagans being involved in politics, but we have to be in the background a lot of times because we fear for our own safety, because people may or may not take us seriously. I'll get into that in a second. It's important to me to put a pin on this right now, because I do want to mention that right now they're passed a bill. I don't know how it's going to stay in place, but public schools would have to display the 10 Commandments under a bill passed in the Texas Senate.
So it has not been passed by the Texas House at this point, right?
That's the last I have, is what I just sent to you. And I don't know. It is a supermajority. So what Nina was saying about the gerrymandering is very important. But what we saw in the last election in Texas is a lot of changes to. I know when I was in Texas, when they made the really strict naming conventions for you had to have your name had to match what you had on your driver's license. I've been a Texan off and on. I've lived in Texas off and on my entire life. I got married in Texas when I was 20 years old to an airman, and I got married in June, and I was in South Dakota by August. I never voted or registered to vote under the name that I had, married name by my husband.
All right.
Over 20 years later, back to my maiden name, living in Texas, registered to vote, voted under my maiden name. Then they made that law about your name had to match, my voter registration came out with his name on it, a name I had never voted with, a name
I would
I
have been
never
so
had driver's
angry.
license. Oh, I was livid. But thankfully, they changed they were making it has to be verbatim. Like if you had a period, a dot, like on your middle name, and it was an initial and it had a dot, it had to match exactly what it said on the voter registration and your driver's license. But then it went to the courts, and the court said no. The court said no, and Nina, you're right too, that there's a lot of stuff that goes on. I don't want to get too distracted, but I do want to address what Nina's saying. But this is one of the first times that I got really involved. I always wanted to get involved, but that's when I reached out, when I was still living in this extremely red county. And I stepped up and I said, I want to do something. And I was appointed a judge for one of the voting precincts, a very, very red voting precinct. Now, one of the things about Texas, one of the things that we have to fight towards as a country is every single state has its own laws on how they handle elections. That's
Right.
okay if you're going to do dog catcher, but if you're going to do federal elections, having 50 plus, because we're talking about DC and the territories, 50 plus different sets of rules. This is why it's so confusing. This is why it's so confusing. So here I am working in Texas as a judge. One of the things that I'm in North Carolina now, when I register to vote, I register with a party. That's the way it is in a lot of states. Is that the way it is in Tennessee, that you register to vote under a party?
You do not have to claim a party affiliation in Tennessee. However, you may only vote in one primary.
Right, and that's standard. Whatever it's based on the primary. In Texas, if anyone in Texas ever tells you that they're a registered whatever, they're not telling you the truth, because you don't register as a whatever. The way that you claim party affiliation is which primary you vote in. So if you want to vote in the Democratic primary, then you get to go up further to the county conventions, to the district conventions, to the state conventions, and hopefully up to Washington, D.C. as part of the DNC, or wherever it's going to be, Chicago this year. But the way that you claim a party affiliation is what party you register, or sorry, you vote in on the primary. So here I am in this really red district, very, very Baptist, very, very conservative. And on the primary day, the line is wrapped around outside, waiting very long for Republicans to vote. And we don't get into the double digits of Democrats voting that day until afternoon.
Wow.
And there's some suppression that goes on because everyone sees where you're voting and they know you, and there is a social pressure going on. There's a lot of ways that suppression shows up. The fact that voting has gotten so partisan now blows my mind. One of the most important voting acts that's happened in 1965 was the Voting Act of 1965, passed by Johnson. And it was always a bipartisan bill or bipartisan law. All the changes that were made to it were bipartisan, even under Republicans' presidencies, even with Republican majorities. The laws were always passed under bipartisan lines, and we've lost that. We've lost sight of how important voting is to remain sacred for everyone.
Right.
And this is one of the things that I do where I get involved. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and address what Nina said. Once they won, quote there, they stopped counting votes. That is one of the things that 45 said when he was running in. He said, quit counting votes. That's not how it works. You have to count, and every state, this is why we have to standardize this, every state has a deadline for when the votes have to be counted and approved. One of my favorite stories is in 2020 when everybody was upset because we didn't have Nevada's votes in or Pennsylvania's votes in, and everybody's like, why won't they hurry up? Well, I'm in North Carolina. On election day, we counted what we had, and then we left for a week. There were still votes outstanding in North Carolina that we didn't even look at for a week. Every state is different. And that's got to change because they make different laws. Texas, I'm sorry, Nina, there's like a whole bunch of laws that they're passing right now to even suppress the vote more. I just brought up how much I didn't like the name part, but they're not letting people vote. They're not letting people vote by mail. They're not letting people cure their ballots, which is if there's a problem with the ballot envelope, you're supposed to be given time to correct that. Problems with the envelope, like you didn't have their witness sign, so you get a witness signature, and then they can accept that ballot. They don't even look at who you're voting for. They just look at what's on the ballot. But they try to look closer at certain votes than others. Nudge, 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 wink, wink. We know. What was I going to say about that? That's all stuff that they're changing in Texas right now, and it was a big mess during the last primary, especially. Remember how I said in Texas, and this is not all about Texas, but in Texas, the way you vote in a primary is you have to vote for you were talking about it in Tennessee, even though you don't have to choose a party affiliation. In a primary, you have to choose a party to vote for. Well, in Texas, that's how you choose what party you're affiliated with. And that means that you have to have a Republican judge and a Democratic judge. There were counties in Texas where they couldn't find a Democratic judge because the environment is so hostile right now. When you have people who are getting death threats for the work that they're doing, we need to find the courage within us to step up and look into how we can get involved. So I'm trying to remember what I showed you. What I shared with you.
The last thing we looked at was the Texas Senate bill.
Right. I shared one thing with you about the United against
yeah, we can look at Americans United next.
Okay, that's not Citizens United, but go ahead and throw that in there. So if you don't mind. Right now, this weekend, they're meeting in the Americans United. This is the American United for Separation of Church and State. And this is about religious freedom. Some elders in our faith are part of this and working really hard to make sure that we try to keep religion out of things like schools. One of I was involved in a podcast with Selena Fox from Circle Sanctuary, who had one of the lead attorneys in this group come, and they were talking about whether or not religious schools, Christian schools, could get public school funds. They lost that case. And now religious, it'd be nice. Can we start a pagan
school?
We need to do that. I'm all for that. Give us some funds there.
And I'm going to add this about Americans Separated or Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, they always take a booth at Nashville Pagan Pride Day.
Do they? Awesome.
Our local chapter does. And we are very happy to work with them. And I'm going to throw out again that we are not trying to talk partisan politics necessarily, but
Right.
it is important for us as pagans to understand that our rights are under attack at this point, because there are those that would push one religion above all others in this country.
And demonize
anyone who does not practice that faith. And I don't want to paint all Christians with the same brush, because that is not true.
Right.
But at the same time, we need to be aware, and we have the ability to take action.
Right.
And so we need to take action to preserve our rights, and we need to be working with other minorities as well.
And other groups like the United, the Citizens United for Separation of Church and State. Find groups
Now,
like that.
Why don't you tell us about your phone banking that you do?
That my phone banking stuff runs from nonpartisan vote protection to very partisan. That's the one. I mentioned that I'm a person with disabilities. I have a really difficult time knocking on doors. We all know what happened with the pandemic. Everything shut down. We had to come up with new rules for everything. And one of the things that really peaked in 2020 is a lot of organizing online. So we use Zoom. We have a lot of tools. And I started out with what I was trying to do here in North Carolina. Is I was recruiting people and training people to be poll observers. Now, it was through the Democratic Party. I'm going to, give you, but the people who I helped at the polls when I did it, I didn't ask them what party they were voting for. I'm in a very predominantly red Republican county, and I know the majority of the people who I was helping have access to the ballot to make sure that their votes were counted correctly. We're not Democrats, but that's my belief, is I'm protecting their votes. I want to say right now, this should not be something that we argue about. This should not be controversial. But we found out through last week in the court case, the judge, the courts found that a certain news organization lied and covered the truth. This should not be controversial. The gentleman, the guy from CISA, who was the person in charge of voter protection for 45's administration, said 2020 was the most secure election ever. That's when I got involved. I'm going to tell you the stuff that I watched being one of the things I did is I started out with a poll observer, and then I became a ballot monitor. And that means that I would show up. And this is one thing that you can do right now. You don't have to join a party. You don't have to join an organization, but they are out there. But you could go to your county's Board of Elections, find out when they meet, find out when they're making the different laws, the different rules. Here, every county gets to choose when they're going to have early voting. One of the things we fought for in our county was Sunday voting, which is extremely important in the South and extremely important to the African American community. They had the souls to the polls. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew it's important for the community. I knew it was a community building thing, but I'm going to tell you, I choke up whenever I hear this story. I heard a story that this one woman was talking about how important it was for her to have the Sunday voting and the vote protecting in Georgia. And she said that she remembered when she was a child and how her mother and all the people in the community fought so hard for the right to vote. And she was scared. She was scared for when they did go to vote, because she knew what happened to Blacks who voted in the South. And she said that she would hold on to her mother's skirt so hard when her mother would go into the voting booth, because she thought she'd lose her mother. And I'm like, I always thought Souls to the Polls was about community building, but I never really, because I've never been in that position, that I realized how important that was to the safety of the voters. And this is the stuff that when you start getting involved and you start learning and you start thinking about all the different things that they're trying to do, and it's only a fragment of people. I'm not painting everybody, like you said, not everybody in the Republican Party, not every conservative is like this, but there's enough people making enough of a noise that we have to stand up and protect, not just the Black vote. We have to protect all marginalized communities. I'm a person with disabilities, like I said. When we're curing ballots, when we're doing get out the votes when you call people and remind them that they need to go vote. The curing the ballots is they've already sent in a ballot by mail, but there's a problem with their ballot container. Again, you don't know how they voted. You've not opened it, but they won't even look at it unless everything on the outside is correct. And you can make those changes in some cases. In other cases, you have to vote again. You're not voting twice. That one didn't count, so you got a do-over. The people who I see, of course, you see the African American, the Black population being impacted. You see the Latinx the Black Latinx communities also being disenfranchised. The AAPI, you're going to see that. But what I see at the very end is a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of persons with disabilities, and a lot of our older people who may be in nursing homes, who may not have rights to the polls, who may not have a way, to get out because they have mobility issues. And that's where my focus is being a person with disabilities, and I'm considered a senior. I have a baby face. That's part of my disability. But yeah, I'm a senior. I'm a person with disabilities, and I am a pagan. So I try to be a voice for those three communities as much as I can. And one of the things that I've gotten involved with, I do a lot of phone banking, like you said, with Get Out the Vote. I was actually on the payroll for the Democratic Party during the last election as an organizer, and I got to do it from my house. Like I said, with Zoom, everything, we can do things now from our house. So if you want to help be a vote protector, you can do this from your house. If you want to help with the Get Out the Vote, the last thing I worked on was Janet Protasewicz, who won in Wisconsin, and we started in the primary, calling people in Wisconsin doing the Get Out the Vote. Calling people up until like 15 minutes before they closed the doors, getting pictures of the students in line at certain universities waiting to vote. And it is this to me shows more than anything else how if we all work together, because all these different organizations, all these different states got together to get out the vote there in Wisconsin. Those poor people in Wisconsin, I vote, quit calling. But they got out there and they voted. So I work with a group out of that's based out of California called Grassroots Dems HQ. If you want to, you can post that. It is a Democratic group. You don't have to be a Democrat to join it or to be part of the work that we do. Again, I don't usually bring up my paganness to them, but they know that I'm a person with disability. They know I'm in North Carolina, and again, they're based out of California. It's been great working with them. I've been able to do phone banks with Amy Brenneman. She did a TV. I guess she's doing a Grey's Anatomy spinoff, but I know her from Judging Amy. Ted Lieu, congressman from California, Maxwell Frost from Florida, Brian Tyler Cohen, who's a pundit on, oh man, that it was just really cool to be able to work with these people and to be part of this community. And I would love to have more pagans in the community. I would love to have a pagan phone bank. I am putting this out there right now. I can get us stuff to phone bank on. If pagans want to reach out to me, or they can do it through Mary Hawk, reach out and we can do a pagan phone bank. You just decide what we want to talk about, what we want to be an activist about, and I can get us connected up, make phone calls. I can, the thing about the Grassroots Dems HQ is they knock doors. They knock doors in California. They also, when we were doing the runoff in Georgia, they sent people to Georgia to knock on doors. They have a program for young people in high school who are interested in politics, that they can actually, if they get accepted into this program, they get trained how to be activists and such, and how to be organizers, and they can even get paid to make these phone calls, or they do postcards. So it's nice. There's a lot of organization out there. Like I said, I belong to I work with the Grassroots Dems HQ. I also do work with a group of grassroots organizers, purely volunteer, called VoProPros. And we just grew out of what happened in 2020. It was beautiful. It was just, everything aligned. That I was in North Carolina doing North Carolina things. Wisconsin people were doing Wisconsin things. Pennsylvania people were doing Pennsylvania things. We were like working so hard to protect votes. Who knew? It was like the universe knew that we really needed to be there at that time to protect the votes, to say no. All this other stuff that the other side's saying is incorrect. And we were there. And then after the election, the runoff in Georgia, and all these different organizations and all these different people from all over the place converged onto Georgia. And I was lucky enough to be part of the leadership and the training in that, where we had people coming in, making phone calls, talking to people about how to cure their ballots. This was the ballots, and that's the reason we won Ossoff and Warnock. I will tell you that right now. That is the reason we won that, is because there's all these ballots that were not going to be accepted if they didn't have the signature right. And that's one of the areas that's going to affect people with disabilities and older people a lot. Because if you're older, your signature might be shaky. If you're a person with a disability, that's what I'm talking about with it's protecting disabled and the older. But there's a lot of people whose names seemed or were from an area that was predominantly Black. They were getting their ballots rejected. We told them how to cure their ballots so they could be counted. And we worked from right after Thanksgiving all the way up to January 6th. We were counting ballots, even though Warnock and Ossoff had just won. We wanted to make sure there was enough of a buffer. And we were on phone banks all day long, 100, 200 people every 2 hours rotating out. So here we are, middle of the afternoon. We take the break to let the new people come in. We look at the news. And we said, I remember saying, this is why we're here. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And to me, the most important thing that happened on that one day to protect our democracy was the pages who took those votes off of the floor. Because if that hadn't happened, there might have been more questions. They saved. That's what I vote. That's what I work toward, was protecting the votes. I don't protect the votes for blue people. I don't protect the votes for red, and I'm talking about blue red. I don't protect the votes for people who are Hindu. I don't protect the votes. I protect all the votes, and you can do that too. You can do that with
And that
organizations.
is so important. And thank you so much for what you do, Pam, because it is so important. Because if every vote doesn't count, we don't have a democracy.
Exactly. And what's happening is they're trying to make votes and voices not count. Going back to, we talked about women's reproductive health. Um, that is overwhelmingly unpopular. The decisions, the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade,
Yeah.
And it's more the fact that there are doctors who are afraid to practice medicine. I have a weird
I tell you
thing.
what, we will.
Go
You can come back and we'll do a whole nother show. Because we got a whole hour or more
Well,
on
I
the
was just going
stage.
to say, I'm afraid of all the doctors that are going to leave for just other things that are women's reproductive health. You know, if you have something
Yes.
that has anything to do with
In
reproductive health.
Tennessee, we currently do not have access to abortion.
In North Carolina, you send a lot of people to North Carolina. 1 out of every 3 abortions done in North Carolina are from people out of state. And we still have really restrictive laws here. There's a story I heard.
The way the law
ahead.
is written in Tennessee right now is if a provider is brought up on charges for performing an abortion, they can plead that the mother's life was in danger.
And women
But
are getting septic.
But there is nothing in the law stating that abortion is legal under condition A, under condition B, under condition C.
There was a story of a woman in Tennessee who had, I guess she was septic. She had a situation where she needed an abortion to save her life, but didn't hit whatever mark. So the provider was in the ambulance with her, taking her to North Carolina, and she was like, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And the provider's like, I'm trying, and that shouldn't happen. It's already bad enough in our country. It's already bad enough in our country where Black women or Black people having babies, maternal health and infant and maternal mortality rates for Black people in the United States are at third world country levels.
Yes.
That is before the Dobbs decision. And
yes.
then what are they going to do to take care of the people once they're born? And I like to bring up, being a person with a disability, that people don't think about what that means to a person with a disability. If I was stupid, I'm going to say that, because I didn't know. I pushed through. It's all in my head. I'm really not that sick. It wasn't until I was older that I realized, oh my gosh. And I had 4 kids and I struggled so hard. What if somebody who's worse off than me is forced to give birth and now is forced to raise a child that they maybe can't even take care of themselves?
Yeah.
What if a person has a disease that runs in the family, a genetic disease? That in itself is another thing, because, to have an amniocentesis, you have to be further along, like in the 2nd trimester of a pregnancy. But let's say that you have a genetic disorder and you don't want to pass it down to your children. There's a lot of nuance of how disabilities impact
there
reproductive
are
health.
tons of nuances.
Yeah. I'm
to
sorry I got off
work.
on that subject, but get
Like
involved.
I said,
Well,
that's a whole nother subject.
but
And you can come back and we'll go off on that one for an hour.
awesome. If you want to get involved right now with political stuff, there's a book that I have called Politics is for Power. And it basically says we need to quit being people who post memes on Facebook. We need to quit being that community, that population of people who argue stuff online, and we need to be people who are actually protecting votes, getting out the vote, giving rights to people, making sure that our votes are protected, making sure that our voices are protected. Because they're not hiding. I don't like buying into the us versus them, but I'm not the one that's drawing out this fight. I'm the one that's I'm the messenger. I'm the messenger. I'm not the person that's the architect. And they are creating an us versus them, a good versus evil. And unfortunately, I see a lot of, we mentioned the Texan connection. I mentioned that I was from Wichita Falls, Texas, from Wichita County. And there was a pastor there who started a lot of this stuff in the 90s, who has gone on to being very involved, being beside 45 in pictures, of being part of he and his congregation found books in the library, Heather's Two Mommies and Daddy's New Boyfriend, about helping kids cope with their parents' same-sex relationships. And the First Baptist Church in Wichita Falls got all upset. We can't let our kids see this. And this was in the 90s. And that fight went all the way up to the ACLU. And the church didn't win. But as you can tell, they didn't stop.
Right.
They aren't stopping. And that's why we have to get involved. So, and it's not unpagan. It's not unpagan. So be brave. And mighty forces will come to aid.
They will.
They will.
So I'm going to add, you can always contact me at Witch Rising, pwtv@gmail.com. You can message me at Witch Rising on Facebook, although if you tell me I'm the first woke pagan since the burning time, I'm not going to answer your message.
I just saw something on Twitter that Mike Lindell is closing down a lot of his stores, the My Pillow guy, because he's dumped all his money towards the wrong horse, basically. And
yes.
Somebody said, "Yeah, that's what they mean by woke. Go woke or go broke."
Oh my goodness. I'm also going to say that next week I will not be live on Witch Rising. We will be playing an older episode because I will be off doing readings for a Nashville Pagan Pride Day fundraiser. One of my many hats I wear, pun intended, is I'm one of the co-coordinators for Nashville Pagan Pride Day. But so I will be running a pre-recorded episode. If you leave me a new comment, I will get back to you, but it won't be Sunday night because once we're done reading and cleaning up the venue, I plan on coming home and falling over.
I understand. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share, because I would love to see more pagan voices, more pagan faces, and more of a pagan presence in this type of work. I feel lonely, and it's hard for me to fight for validity for my place at the table if I'm the only voice there. So please, I know I'm not the only one.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I've enjoyed having you. I hope you will come back again. I'm sure there are many topics we can discuss. And again, I'm Reverend Mary Hawk, and this is my guest, Sarah Pamela Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us on Witch Rising.
Witch Rising. With Reverend Mary Hawk. Purple Goddess by Reverend Don Lewis. Angry Uterus by Carrie Wagner. Announcer, Don Hawk. Music written and performed by Don Hawk. In loving memory of Mary Frankie Clark.